The Devil's Tongue in the Rock Dance. There's a story no one dares to tell aloud, whispered only in the deepest shadows, that amidst the frenzied melodies and blinding stage lights. A devil has slept with an entire century. He has no horns, no tail, and instead of blood, what courses through his veins is the rhythm of rock and the faint moans of countless souls. His name is Mick Jagger. With his famously long, serpentine tongue and hips that slither across the stage to the beat, Jagger doesn't merely step onto a stage, he invades it. He doesn't just sing, he seals a pact with his audience through primal screams and untamed sounds. And when he grins, that knowing, unsettling sneer. Like a razor blade caressing a wrist, the world collectively holds its breath, caught in a pleasure mingled with sheer terror. Because no one is ever truly certain if they're witnessing a rock concert, or a ritualistic summoning of something far more ancient than the stage lights themselves. Some claim he is the last of the great artists, a sole survivor after the massacres of time. Morrison, Hendrix, Brian Jones, Amy Winehouse, all have withered like dry leaves, yet he still dances. But others whisper that to endure like that, to remain so vibrant and ageless, he must have sold his soul, or worse, stolen the souls of others. This isn't mere speculation. It's a chilling undertone that permeates every aspect of his extraordinary, yet deeply disturbing, existence. Consider the women who orbited him, from the melancholic muse Marianne Faithfull to the radiant goddess Jerry Hall. Each was once as brilliant as the morning sun, only to descend, one by one, into the abyss of addiction, debilitating depression, or even to hang themselves in desolate apartments. Ren Scott, the celebrated fashion designer, a woman of formidable talent and independent spirit, once whispered during a slip-of-the-tongue interview, a tremor in her voice. "There's something about Mick, it's as if he drains women of their life force. To love him is to choose a slow death." A week later, she was found dead, a final, chilling testament to the power she spoke of. This wasn't a coincidence to those who knew the dark patterns surrounding him, it was an ominous echo of a curse. The authorities have, at times, shadowed him, their investigations often leading to dead ends. The press has ceaselessly dug into every scandal, every fleeting rumor, hoping to unearth something definitive, only to find themselves lost in a labyrinth of conflicting narratives and carefully constructed facades. Biographers, too, have embarked on the daunting task of chronicling Jagger's life, only to emerge exhausted. Some even psychologically scarred. No one has truly managed to fully capture the portrait of Jagger without leaving a piece of their own soul entangled in the dark threads of his story. There was one particular author, a tenacious investigative journalist named Lawrence Taylor, who defiantly declared, "I will expose Mick's true face to the world." He vanished a week later. All that was ever recovered was a single, cryptic cassette tape. On it, the discordant, off-key strums of a guitar, interspersed with a voice, not quite human, a whispered rasp. Like a spirit possessing a recording, Sympathy for the Devil isn't just a song. It's a confession. The implication was clear, chilling, and undeniable to anyone who dared to listen. And then there's Brian Jones, the visionary founding member of the Rolling Stones, whose life, like a fragile, exquisite melody, was cut tragically short when he drowned in his swimming pool in 1969. Accident? Suicide? Or something far more sinister? A calculated purge? Those closest to the band, the few who were truly privy to the inner workings of their strange, secretive world, recounted that in his final, tormented months, Brian frequently dreamt of a colossal serpent, a creature with a laugh chillingly identical to Mick's. One of Brian's last, frantic journal entries, scrawled in a shaky hand, read, "He comes in dreams. No eyes. No heart. Just the drumbeat of blood. A terrifying premonition or a direct accusation from beyond the grave? The line between reality and hallucination blurred. leaving behind only the cold, hard fact of Jones's untimely demise. Beneath the blinding stage lights, Mick Jagger is undeniably a modern-day sorcerer, a shaman of rhythm and spectacle, captivating millions with his mesmerizing incantations. But backstage, away from the intoxicating roar of the crowd, beyond the expensive vintage wine and the opulent hotel suites, there are ghosts that refuse to move on. There are the unspoken stories of broken women, their spirits perhaps lingering in the very air he breathes. There are the hidden cassette tapes, brimming with chilling whispers and unsettling confessions that were never meant for public ears. There are the contracts, rumored to have been sealed not just with ink, but with blood, and perhaps not just metaphorically. The haunting question that lingers, unanswered and unsettling, is this: does he still possess his own soul? Or has he himself been replaced by something else, something ancient and insatiable, a being that merely wears the skin of Mick Jagger? Year after year, decade after decade, Mick continues to perform, to breathe heavily into the microphone as if reaching an ecstatic climax, to thrust his tongue out in defiance of the world, a perpetual declaration of war against mortality itself. He still cavorts with 20-year-old models, undergoes hormone therapies and cutting-edge cell rejuvenation treatments, practices disciplined yoga, adheres to strict vegan diets. Yet, the only things he seemingly cannot abandon are sex, control, and, in a strangely macabre way, death itself. The younger the woman, the more fragile and innocent, the more he appears drawn to them. It's as if he isn't seeking love or companionship, but rather time, the vibrant life energy, the very essence of immortality from their fleeting youth. The media, while outwardly shocked by his relentless pursuit of youth and his continued scandals, is also subtly complicit. Because how can you truly fight against an icon who has been so thoroughly deified, elevated to the status of a living god? Who dares to drag a living deity through the mud if they know that within that mud lie the skeletal remains of countless others who tried and failed? You might simply say, he's just a wild rock star. That's all. But no. There's something inherently off, something fundamentally misaligned. Something unnatural about Mick Jagger, like a piece of music played in reverse, revealing a hidden, sinister message. Amidst the searing guitar riffs and the erratic drum beats, like a frantic, desperate heart, there exists an entity that speaks, that laughs, that sleeps with the world, but fundamentally does not belong to it. And now, you are about to delve deeper into that very story. There is no contract binding you to read on. No one is forcing you to follow each chapter as if tracking a crime. But remember this: if you gaze into Mick Jagger's eyes for too long, if you allow yourself to be drawn into the abyss of his gaze, you will begin to see your own reflection, young, beautiful, innocent, before it shatters like stained glass under the weight of a burning cathedral. This book, this narrative, or any version of it, it doesn't just tell a story. It warns. It tears open the glamorous facade and blackens the blinding light. It won't save you. It will only show you the path downwards. Because once you've truly glimpsed the devil's real face, you will never be able to look at the world with the same eyes again. The tolling bell, from economics student to the dark angel of rock and roll. No one emerges from the depths of hell with perfectly coiffed hair and a first-class economics degree, no one, that is, except Mick Jagger. He was a walking paradox, a wild, untamed poem scrawled in the ink of chaos and raw ambition. Michael Philip Jagger, born in 1943, didn't draw his first breath in the shadowy recesses of grimy back alleys or the desolate squalor of urban slums. Instead, his formative years unfolded amidst the genteel comforts of a middle-class family in Dartford, Kent. His father, a physical education teacher, embodied discipline and routine, while his mother, a hairdresser, brought a touch of normalcy to their home. It seemed, on the surface, a placid, unremarkable childhood. Yet, simmering beneath the calm veneer of young Michael was a nascent, volatile fire, an insatiable craving to transcend the mundane boundaries of ordinary existence, to break free from the predetermined path laid out for him. The venerable London School of Economics, an institution steeped in academic rigor and intellectual pursuits, once recorded him as an exceptionally brilliant student. A mind so sharp that his professors remarked he could have become an outstanding entrepreneur if he hadn't been led astray by that noisy sound called rock and roll. Led astray? No. Mick was never lost. He wasn't some derailed train, helplessly veering off the tracks of a preordained destiny. On the contrary, he was a beast, an apex predator, charging headlong into that wild, untamed jungle of sound, driven by the unerring instinct of a hunter, not the passive resignation of a captive. He had seen, he had heard, and he had been irrevocably seduced by the siren call of another world, a world where numbers and economic charts held no sway, where the only reigning powers were primal rhythm and the explosive release of raw, unbridled emotion. That economics degree? It was nothing more than a flimsy facade. A mere piece of paper testifying to a keen intellect, yet utterly incapable of imprisoning the rebellious, anarchic spirit raging within him. It was a disguise, quickly shed. In 1962, on a fog-drenched platform at Dartford Station, fate orchestrated a meeting, not merely between two old acquaintances, but between two kindred spirits destined to conjure a storm. He re-encountered Keith Richards, a childhood friend, and the very individual who would join him in etching a bloody, frenzied, and undeniably magnificent chapter into the annals of music history. In the worn canvas bag clutched in Mick's hand were faded, well-loved vinyl records of Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry, blues and rock and roll anthems that screamed for life, demanded freedom, and insisted on the inherent right to rebel against all norms. These weren't just records, they were cryptic codes, ancient incantations, the very seeds of a musical revolution poised to detonate. From that singular moment, he ceased to be an economics student with conventional aspirations of a stable career path. He was the future frontman of the Rolling Stones, a band that would embody the raw, unadulterated soul of American blues, yet possess the rebellious, arrogant body of a proud and defiant British monster. And then, starting from those dilapidated old train stations permeated by the stale scent of cigarette smoke and dampness, moving into the shadowy, grimy pubs reeking of stale beer and sweat, Mick Jagger began his metamorphosis. His transformation was no gentle evolution, no subtle refinement. It was a violent, agonizing, yet utterly mesmerizing shedding of skin. No one remembered the diligent student who once sat in the front row, meticulously absorbing lectures on microeconomics. All they saw was a creature that slithered onto the stage, swaying his hips like a mesmerized serpent, unleashing a primal scream like a demon who just smoked 1,000 cigarettes and was now howling about life and death, about desire and sin. He didn't merely sing, he possessed. He didn't just perform, he summoned. Every sound that tore from his throat was a curse, every movement of his body a piece of dark magic, drawing the audience into a primordial world of uninhibited instinct and uncontrollable desire. He wasn't simply performing, he merged with the music, becoming the living embodiment of rebellion, of the seductive evil that the entire world craved to taste. He was the very manifestation of everything forbidden, everything repressed, everything buried beneath the suffocating layers of societal convention. Mick Jagger wasn't classically handsome, he lacked the delicate, chiseled features of Hollywood matinee idols. His chin was sharp, his eyes deep-set and piercing, his cheekbones high and angular. And then there was that mouth, that impossibly wide mouth, capable of swallowing an entire world. A mouth perpetually twisted into a cynical, knowing smirk, as if constantly mocking every rule, every moral code. Yet, women loved him to the point of madness. Men yearned to be him, or to have him. It was a kind of allure that defied biological or sociological explanation. It could only be explained by a single word: cursed. He was a living curse. An irresistible hex that no one wished to break, a potent venom that every moth yearned to hurl itself into. He was the ultimate symbol of abandon, of absolute freedom, of transcending every boundary society dared to impose. Every gaze he cast was an invitation, every gesture he made a challenge, a dare to plunge into the abyss. The First Women. A prelude to tragedy. Mick Jagger was more than just a rock star. He was a deadly magnet, drawing both the fragile and the formidable, those craving rebellion and those seeking an elusive liberation. The women who entered his orbit weren't just lovers, they were victims, witnesses, and often, shattered fragments of a storm named Jagger. Marianne Faithfull, the melancholic muse. With a voice like morning dew, fragile and angelic. She was one of the first to step into the Jagger universe, not with trepidation, but with the naive curiosity of an innocent swept into a whirlpool. When she met Mick, she was at her zenith, an icon of swinging 60s Britain, a symbol of purity and pristine beauty. She was a rose blossoming vibrantly in the colorful garden of music. But merely a few years later, that rose withered chillingly. She lay prostrate on a Chelsea sofa, deeply addicted to heroin, her teeth ravaged by drug abuse. Her voice hoarse as if someone had brutally torn at her vocal cords with bare fingernails. Mick, ever the ephemeral force, moved on. He was like a toxic wind, sweeping through and leaving only desolation in his wake. She was left to grapple with the aftershocks of a love that felt like a train wreck, a tragedy from which she could barely recover. Faithfull would later compose haunting songs about that period, whispers from the abyss of a soul irreparably damaged. She served as living proof of Mick Jagger's destructive power. Not through physical violence, but through the gradual, insidious erosion of the soul. Anita Pallenberg, an Italian-born sex symbol. A woman who notoriously shared beds not only with Mick but also with Keith Richards and Brian Jones. She was a sorceress, a warrior, a woman seemingly indomitable by anyone, save for Mick Jagger. Her relationship with the Stones was a complex web of lust, betrayal, and a mesmerizing, almost mystical, enchantment. In one interview, Anita chuckled grimly. A laugh laced with bitter irony and a harsh, cutting understanding. We didn't make love. We devoured each other. Pallenberg bore witness to more than anyone else, the wild, drug-fueled nights. The ecstatic screams of the crowds, and the unshed tears, the unspoken sobs backstage, as weary and ravaged souls sought a fleeting moment of peace amidst the maelstrom. She was privy to the band's darkest secrets, the hidden depths within the men whose beds and lives she had shared. Yet, by the end of her life, she lived as a recluse. Speaking to phantoms and vehemently refusing all recording devices, as if fearing her voice might unleash forbidden truths, curses that had clung to her throughout her existence. Mick had left something nameless within her, an invisible scar that would never truly heal. Bianca Jagger, the Nicaraguan socialite, the first woman to legally bind Mick in marriage. A move that stunned public opinion and led many to believe that Mick had finally found his anchor. She embodied elegance, power, and a strange, exotic mystique. Marriage, for Mick, was never a chain he could wear for long. It was a binding, a limitation that his free, untamed nature simply could not tolerate. After a period spent living the glittering illusion of lavish parties, endless global travel, and extravagant luxury, Bianca separated from him. Their marriage, a whirlwind of fleeting moments, lasted a mere 8 years. They say on her last night at Mick's French villa, she shattered a large mirror, staring at her bloodied reflection, an image of a broken soul, and whispered, not to Mick, but to herself, to the silent world around her. The real devils don't come from hell. They have British passports. That statement wasn't just personal bitterness, It was a chilling warning, a profound affirmation of the cunning, sophisticated, and ultimately malevolent nature of Mick Jagger and all that he represented. Jerry Hall, the Texas siren with legs as long as lightning bolts, cascading blonde hair, and a dazzling smile. She was the woman who lived with Jagger for nearly 2 decades, bearing him 4 children, creating what appeared, on the surface, to be a happy and enduring family unit. Jerry Hall seemed to be the only one capable of taming Mick's wildness, at least for a significant period. But in the end, Jagger's inherent nature, his insatiable need for novelty and destruction, inevitably resurfaced. She was, predictably, replaced by a younger model, as if it were an unavoidable law in Jagger's dark universe. Jerry shed no tears publicly. She didn't scream or display weakness. She simply smiled in one interview, a smile that held both profound understanding and a hint of bitter irony. When you live with the devil, you cannot blame him for being the devil. You can only blame yourself for forgetting to bring your cross. This wasn't an act of blame, it was an acceptance of a harsh, inescapable truth, that you cannot tame a devil, you can only protect yourself from its destructive influence. Sex as ritual, love as weapon. Mick Jagger was not merely a sex symbol. He was a master of manipulation, a mesmerizing seducer of souls. The list of famous individuals he was rumored to have had affairs with stretches to an almost unbelievable length. From Madonna and Angelina Jolie to Carla Bruni and even David Bowie, a name that sparks both controversy and carries a peculiar, dark significance. The whispers and rumors about the relationship between Jagger and Bowie went beyond mere public curiosity. They delved deep into the spiritual and strangely energetic connection between these two musical titans. At a party in Laurel Canyon, Mick and Bowie were reportedly seen together in a bubble bath, playing tarot cards and laughing in unison, as if engaged in some clandestine ritual, a ceremony reserved only for the specially chosen, the already initiated souls. Bowie's ex-wife, Angela, famously walked into their bedroom one morning and described the scene both wild and primal. They were stark naked, like 2 cats who had just been fighting and making love at the same time. This description didn't just evoke sensuality, it hinted at a primal energy, a connection that transcended the boundaries of conventional sexuality. But sex with Mick was never solely for mere pleasure. It was power, it was ritual, it was the key to controlling the minds of others. For Jagger, the body was not just a tool for satisfying carnal desires, it was a weapon, a vehicle to penetrate the soul, to sow chaos and cultivate dependence. Some former Rolling Stones associates recounted haunting games played before concerts. Mick would demand that girls strip naked, paint symbols on their skin with fake blood, then instruct them to swear allegiance to the Stones, as if they were initiating into a secret, dark cult. These weren't just sick jokes, these were manipulative rituals. Acts designed to break boundaries, blur reason, and create absolute, unwavering submission. An anonymous artist, known only as V, once spoke with a trembling voice, "I thought it was just kinky. But after 3 years, I lost all my friends, my memories, and my sanity. Now I can't even remember my own face." This wasn't a lament, it was the raw scream of a soul utterly destroyed. A chilling warning about the toxic nature of Mick Jagger. He didn't just have sex, he implanted something into their bodies. A poison. A virus. A persistent illusion that clung to them for the rest of their lives. Descent into darkness, the cult of Stones. By the mid-1970s, Mick was no longer a mere rocker, he was a guru, a high priest. His band was his cult, and their concerts were not just performances, they were sacred rituals, where tens of thousands of mesmerized souls were summoned to immerse themselves in a frenzied, almost ecstatic musical ceremony. The music of the Stones wasn't just catchy melodies, it was a glorification of rebellion, a breaking of all limits. A liberation of primal instincts that resonated deep within the human psyche. At Chateau de Braux, the ancient, sprawling villa in the south of France where the Stones famously recorded their legendary album Exile on Main Street, the atmosphere was not merely filled with music but permeated by an eerie, mystical aura. Locals in the surrounding villages still recount tales of nights when ominous red light emanated from the second-story windows, when drums echoed like spirit calls from another dimension, and when the unmistakable smell of blood mixed with incense permeated the air, a scent both haunting and inexplicable. These stories were whispered from ear to ear, gradually transforming into urban legends about the mysterious, dark rituals performed by the band within those hallowed, yet tainted, walls. A former maid, who eventually quit due to her terrifying experiences, recounted with a fearful whisper, "I saw them cut each other's hair, burn it into smoke, then dip cassette tapes into lamb's blood before recording." Of course, no concrete evidence has ever surfaced to corroborate these chilling accounts. But the sound on that album? No one who has truly listened to it has ever slept soundly afterwards. Exile on Main Street wasn't just an album, it was a manifesto of chaos, of moral decay, and of the darkest corners of the human soul. Every note, every lyric, was saturated with a primal energy, a deliberate madness that pulled listeners into a seemingly bottomless abyss. Conclusion: when the devil begins to whisper. Mick Jagger was never arrested for rape, never convicted for drug offenses, never officially ruined anyone in a way the law could explicitly intervene. But those who were closest to him, women, men, musicians, poets, all those who dared to step into his enigmatic world, were never truly themselves afterward. They stumbled out of his life like survivors of a horrific bus crash, shattered, trembling, and with seemingly nothing left to lose. They were derailed trains, souls irrevocably damaged, carrying invisible yet eternal scars from their contact with a dark, pervasive power. We will delve even deeper into the shocking arrests that made headlines, the dark addictions that nearly destroyed the band members, the mysterious rituals conducted backstage, and the souls seemingly trapped within the very fabric of the Rolling Stones' music. But first, you need to understand this fundamental truth. Mick Jagger is not merely a singer. He is a force. He is the first cut on the body of modern culture, a laceration that opened a new era of rebellion, debauchery, and the uninhibited liberation of primal instincts. And his music is merely his laughter, an echoing, maddening, and utterly mesmerizing laugh, as the blood begins to drip from that very cut. The insatiable thirst, drugs, sex, and lost souls. It didn't begin with a single cigarette, nor with the sharp prick of a needle. There was no prophetic call from the past, no fateful, deafening alarm bell. It was merely that one day, Mick Jagger realized that fame no longer ignited him, no longer provided the visceral thrill he once craved. The fervent applause from tens of thousands of adoring fans merely made his skin itch, an inexplicable dermatological condition, a chronic allergy to conventional satisfaction. Millions revered him. Countless girls screamed his name until their throats were raw, yet it all dissolved into meaningless noise within the ever-expanding void in his soul. Music, the very force that had once rescued him from the mundane existence of an economics student, the sacred flame that had burned away all limitations, was now merely the background rhythm for a grander, far more sinister ritual, the ritual of insatiable craving, of absolute power over the bodies of others, and above all, over their very souls. And so, he began to dig deeper, not into the hearts of his audience to find adoration, but into the very spiritual core of naked, vulnerable, and desperate souls. He excavated them with narcotics, with raw, uninhibited sex, with everything forbidden, every boundary meticulously erected by civilized society. This was no longer Mick Jagger the singer. This was an ancient beast in human guise, a primal entity emerging from the dark cave of instinct. raising its head high and hissing with a hoarse blues voice, shattering every moral code that modern humanity had painstakingly constructed. He didn't just break the rules, he mocked them. He danced on the smoldering ashes of ethical values, becoming a new deity of lawlessness and the liberation of the darkest, most carnal instincts. Villa Nelcote. The Devil's Chateau. When the Rolling Stones departed England in 1971 to escape cripplingly high income taxes, they weren't merely seeking a financial refuge, they were searching for a new kingdom. A lawless domain where they could freely indulge their darkest, most hedonistic instincts. And they found it in Villa Nelcote, a magnificent yet somber mansion nestled in the south of France, overlooking the azure expanse of the Mediterranean Sea. But the idyllic exterior was merely a deceptive facade for the chaos and decay festering within. They brought with them a retinue so chaotic, so debauched, it bordered on the unbelievable, the world's top sound engineers, private chefs preparing extravagant banquets, dozens of prostitutes from across Europe, notorious drug lords with endless shipments of illicit substances, underage runaways seeking fame and rebellion, and a Haitian occultist named Loic, a mysterious figure rumored to possess the ability to communicate with the spirit world. The villa overlooked the sea, yet its windows were perpetually sealed. Thick velvet curtains blocking out every ray of natural light, transforming the interior into a ghostly theater illuminated only by flickering candles and dim, eerie lamps. Sunlight was forbidden to penetrate, as if its pure rays would expose the dark secrets unfolding within. Every day, Mick Jagger, clad in thin silk robes, his fingers adorned with massive skull rings, symbols of death and dominance, would wander barefoot across the icy marble floors, moving from room to room like a high priest inspecting his congregants. He was no gracious host, he was the officiant of an unending, illicit ritual. No one was truly a guest there, all were servants, pawns in his elaborate game of power. All obeyed with absolute submission, as if hypnotized by an invisible, sinister force. Any who dared to resist, any who dared utter a single no, were simply eliminated from the ceremony, meaning they were unceremoniously thrown out the gates in the dead of night, naked, without identification, lost in the unforgiving darkness of a foreign land. It was the cruelest form of punishment, to strip away everything, to reduce a human being to an invisible shadow. At Nelcote, Mick no longer loved anyone in the conventional sense, he selected. And when he selected, no one had the right to refuse, there was no choice, no personal freedom to be exercised. It was said he kept a small, black notebook, its leather cover worn with age, meticulously detailing the name of each girl, her age, the pliability of her body, her initial level of resistance, and her psychological reaction after being chosen. Cryptic symbols were scrawled next to their names, like clinical diagnostic charts. D. Destroyed property after waking. C. Cried incessantly for 20 minutes. T. Self-harmed with fingernails. X. Never found, vanished without a trace. That notebook, if it indeed existed, was a map of hell. Meticulously transcribed with the cold, detached hand of an artist playing with devils, a chilling document of human wreckage recorded with scientific precision and utter emotional detachment. It was not a diary, it was a butcher's ledger. Drugs, the serum of discovery. Drugs at Nelcote were not for mere recreation or simple physical pleasure. They were an indispensable part of the ritual. A potent serum used to unlock the locked doors within the mind and soul. Heroin was reportedly dripped into eyes to open the third eye, to see things that ordinary people could not, to pierce through the veil of reality and touch other, darker dimensions. LSD was mixed with rooster blood, an act steeped in ancient magic and sacrificial connotations, and semen to elevate the soul to a higher plane, a powerful, hallucinogenic cocktail that plunged users into ecstatic, uncontrollable states. Cocaine was sprinkled onto women's bodies like holy salt, an act both reverential and humiliating. Before Mick snorted lines along their spines, as if absorbing vital life energy from their naked forms. Adolescent girls, innocent and desperate for recognition, were lured to the villa under the pretense of fashion internships or photo modeling opportunities. But the moment they crossed the cold marble threshold, they were stripped of their clothes and their very selves, their innocence and dignity systematically peeled away. They were then ushered into the light sleep room, a chamber illuminated only by dim pink lights, creating a hallucinatory and sexually charged atmosphere, where Keith Richards' haunting guitar riff played continuously, a hypnotic sound that paralyzed the will. There, Mick entered like the priest of a macabre ceremony, and acted like a toxic breeze. Gentle, silent, yet from which no one escaped. He didn't need to use physical force, his mere presence, his piercing gaze, his insidious voice were enough to paralyze all resistance. A 19-year-old French model named Delphine, after 3 days held captive in the villa, was brought to a hospital in a state of complete exhaustion, her body wasted, her mind gripped by prolonged and terrifying hallucinations, blood present in her urine, clear signs of severe physical and psychological devastation. When she regained consciousness, she repeated a single phrase for days, like a haunting curse, "I heard him inside me." A profoundly disturbing statement, hinting not only at physical violation but at a complete spiritual invasion. No one filed a lawsuit, no investigation ever truly took root. The Rolling Stones had their own lawyers, their own doctors always on call. And more importantly, they held the press in the palm of their hand. Such stories never passed the stringent censorship of mainstream media, who were paid handsomely to remain silent. Only a few scandalous tabloids dared to hint at obscure headlines: "Blonde girl vanishes after debauched party at Mick's villa." But the audience didn't care, they just wanted the next show. Eager to plunge themselves into the frenzied music and forget everything else. Unbounded exploration, the dissolution of morality. Jagger once declared in an interview, with his characteristic sneer, "I'm not addicted, I explore." And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying truth, far more chilling than any mere addiction. For an addict, there remains the glimmer of hope for rehabilitation, a possibility of finding a way out. But for an unbounded explorer, one with no moral compass, no ethical boundaries, nothing is forbidden. He didn't seek satisfaction, he sought extremism, transgression, destruction. One night, at a feverish concert in Los Angeles, he invited a 17-year-old dancer named Sophia onto the stage. A talented young girl desperate for her moment in the spotlight. She performed naked amidst the deafening, screeching guitar feedback of Keith Richards, creating a shocking and haunting spectacle. After the show, she vanished. Police were called, but then everything fell silent, eerily so. 2 years later, a woman was found wandering in Portland, Oregon, suffering from amnesia. Her body covered in scars, her DNA matching Sophia's. She no longer recognized herself, couldn't remember her name, couldn't recall her past life. In her old diary, scrawled in trembling ink, were cryptic entries, like a curse from the past: "He looked straight into my eyes and I disappeared." The press labeled it a psychiatric accident, a convenient way to cover up a horrific truth. The Rolling Stones remained silent. Jagger merely smirked when asked about the incident, his eyes cold and unfeeling. Those girls are always dreamers, always wanting to find something too big for them. Backstage, the Stones' concerts weren't just parties, they were meticulously planned military campaigns, rife with manipulation and abuse. Mick demanded a menu of at least 4 new girls each week, no older than 23, with no boyfriends, and crucially, no relatives in the US to avoid legal complications. The band's manager selected these girls as if choosing slaves, based on chillingly inhumane criteria. Reports even suggested some were brought from Eastern Europe. Trafficked through dubious fashion modeling agencies, young women desperate for a better life who instead fell into a trap far darker than anything they could have imagined. A Hungarian girl named Lily once recounted being forced to take heroin before entering Mick's room, a chamber containing a gigantic mirror reflecting her own distorted image. An enchanting Indian music playing continuously from a speaker system, and a mysterious bed draped in black fur. She described how, during intimacy, Mick would close his eyes, chant something in ancient Latin, as if performing a ritual, and then rub heroin mixed with semen onto her stomach. He wasn't making love, he was praying, she whispered, her voice haunted, as if she were still living through that nightmare. It wasn't sex, it was a sacrifice, a ritual of energy absorption. Ren Scott, the final victim? When Ren Scott, Mick Jagger's long-term girlfriend, a talented and vibrant fashion designer, committed suicide in 2014, the world was stunned. No suicide note. No obvious signs of clinical depression. But her friends claimed she lived like a ghost in her final years, a mere shadow of her former self, drained of energy and vitality. Some nights, she dreamt she was being buried alive by Mick beneath the recording studio floor, next to a microphone, as if he intended to capture her final breath for some macabre track. In a conversation with her trusted stylist, Ren once said with a voice full of despair, "I'm no longer a woman. I'm the shadow he hangs in his closet." On the day she died, only a short text message was sent to Mick's phone, "I can't take it anymore." The forensic report noted several unexplained bruises on her neck that did not match the ligature marks. Mysterious bruises that were never adequately accounted for. Doctors refused to comment, maintaining a suspicious silence. Independent investigative journalists who attempted to access the case files were denied. The Rolling Stones released a new album 3 months later, titled Blue and Lonesome. An ironically poignant name, hinting at sadness and solitude, yet offering no real answers. The devil with a British passport. Behind the agonizing wail of the guitar, the frantic beat of the drums like a dying heart, lies a question no one has dared to ask loudly enough, a question that haunts every conscience: is Mick Jagger still human? Or has he long transcended the boundaries of flesh and morality, becoming an entity that feeds on the downfall of others? An anonymous journalist once wrote, hidden behind a pseudonym in a small, obscure newspaper, too afraid to reveal their identity, Mick Jagger doesn't age, because he consumes the youth of those he sleeps with. It sounds insane, a preposterous fantasy. Yet consider his life, look back at the women who passed through it, from Marianne Faithfull to Jerry Hall, from Bianca to Ren, each passed through his life like an exhausted shadow. A soul utterly drained. They entered as radiant goddesses, full of life, but emerged as mere husks, fragmented beings beyond repair. No one dares to speak loudly enough. Because to speak out is to confront an empire, a monumental musical icon revered by the entire world. But in the nightmares of the girls who passed through his life, in the hidden corners of their damaged souls, perhaps there still echoes the haunting guitar from an unreleased track, a chilling melody only they can hear, where Mick whispers, his voice cold and devoid of emotion, "I don't need you to love me. I just need you to disappear right when I'm singing the last line." High priest of the long night, Mick Jagger and the rituals of darkness. In Hollywood, there are certain mansions where the lights are never fully on, where velvet curtains remain perpetually drawn, day and night, and every mirror is shrouded in black cloth to conceal distorted reflections of unsettling truths. Within such places, truth itself ceases to exist, only layers upon layers of trauma and delusion pile upon each other, forming an impenetrable veil that conceals unspeakable horrors. Mick Jagger, however, did not merely reside in such a mansion, he was the mansion itself. He was a grandiose structure, an imposing edifice built from raw sensuality, musical instruments shrieking with primal instinct, ethereal wisps of drug smoke, and the unacknowledged moans of souls too shattered to be named, too broken to admit their very existence. The narrative was no longer about a mere singer, A simple entertainer, but about a living icon, a high priest of the long night who had transformed depravity into a philosophy, a new religion, forcing the global elite to bow in hushed reverence, and compelling mesmerized youth to scream for the privilege of collapsing at his feet, offering their very souls to his dark allure. He wasn't just a performer, he was the conductor. The very spirit of a colossal, invisible cult. The White Sleep Ceremony, a vortex of soul-stripping. By the late 1970s, a period when social rebellion and societal experimentation reached their zenith, Mick no longer sought drugs merely for pleasure, for a fleeting high. He wielded them as precise instruments. Sharp surgical scalpels designed to dissect the soul, to meticulously strip away humanity's final psychological barriers. He began orchestrating what he termed white sleep ceremonies, a name that, despite its seemingly innocent facade, concealed a chilling, profound darkness. These ceremonies typically unfolded within secluded villas in Malibu. Opulent yet isolated enclaves where absolute privacy was guaranteed. Within these clandestine venues, only two inviolable rules, two commandments of this unholy cult, prevailed: no cameras, ensuring no tangible evidence ever existed, and no memories, for whatever transpired during those nights would be systematically erased from the minds of the participants, or buried so deep they could never be fully resurrected. On those nights, it was said he appeared in flowing black robes intricately embroidered with the symbol of a two-headed serpent, an ancient emblem of rebirth, duality, and dark, demonic power, clutching a cold silver scepter, like a shadowy deity. Surrounding him were carefully selected beauties, not famous, to avoid public scrutiny, unattached to anyone, to facilitate easy isolation, and crucially, without family in the US, ensuring no one would search for them if they vanished. These girls were led into a smoke-filled room, thick with the intoxicating fumes of frankincense, sage, and the sweet, cloying vapor of diffused morphine, a noxious blend of narcotic and hallucinogenic aromas that created a surreal, phantasmagoric atmosphere. There, they were instructed to disrobe. Not out of mundane lust, but to strip away every layer of social veneer, every last vestige of self-defense. Their hands were ritually cleansed with golden wine, an act mimicking purification rites but actually serving as a grotesque preparation for spiritual defilement. Then, they stepped into a dimly lit circle on the floor, like enchanted animals entering a meticulously laid trap. Mick stood on a raised dais, uttering not a single word, merely nodding with an unnerving, imperious authority. Then, the drums began, not from instruments, but from the very chests of the men seated around the circle, each man pounding his chest in rhythm, the pulse of blood, the rhythm of the hunt. The frantic beat of a heart pounding within the chests of those about to become victims. It was during these very nights that Mick did not engage in sex in the conventional sense, he controlled. He sat on a high chair, observing, directing, like a general on a battlefield. He didn't need to touch, his mere presence, his piercing gaze, his insidious whispers were enough to manipulate everything. It was rumored he once demanded two girls ingest acid mixed with breast milk, a perverted concoction of purity and corruption, and then together immerse themselves in a bathtub filled with cow's blood. To be reborn in sound, a deeply sacrilegious ritual evoking ancient sacrifice and grotesque transformation. A Polish model who participated in a white sleep ceremony later recounted that after that night, she could no longer listen to Stone's music every time the melody played. She felt herself peeling off her own skin with her bare hands, as if the music had become a corrosive toxin eating away at her flesh and soul. A photographer who accidentally gained access to one of these macabre spaces abandoned his profession after witnessing an inhuman look in Mick's eyes, the gaze of one who had just sent a soul away. Without lifting a finger, an emotionless gaze, utterly devoid of remorse. Ritualistic sound and cinema. Haunting images. Jagger began frequenting clandestine meetings of the Hollywood occult elite, secret gatherings where the most powerful figures in entertainment and art sought forbidden knowledge. Paranormal powers. It was a shadowy realm where Roman Polanski sometimes appeared in a mysterious black hat, or even Marilyn Manson, an undisputed icon of rebellion and the grotesque, was merely a junior guest, a small apprentice compared to the formidable presence of Mick. Mick rarely spoke, preferring to listen, absorbing everything like a sponge. But when he did speak, the entire room fell silent, every eye fixed upon him. He didn't need to raise his voice, his sheer authority was enough to subdue all. It was whispered that during one such meeting, when a young director tentatively suggested introducing Mick to ritual cinema, hinting at bringing occult ceremonies to the big screen, Jagger merely uttered a single sentence. Cold and laden with unspoken meaning, "I don't need a camera to leave my mark on their lives. I have my voice." That statement wasn't mere arrogance. It was absolute confidence in his own manipulative, almost supernatural, power. From that point onward, a series of the Rolling Stones music videos began to adopt a more enigmatic and macabre aesthetic, recurring imagery of serpentine hands, inverted crosses, bloodshot eyes, and girls screaming in silent agony, their cries stifled by the very horror they experienced. Sympathy for the Devil was no longer a mere classic rock anthem, it became a foundational ritual. An invitation to the world of darkness, a chilling hymn to the devil. These images were not just artistic expressions, they were symbols, coded messages sewn into the minds of the audience, slowly embedding themselves into the subconscious, blurring the lines between reality and illusion, between entertainment and ritual. The Dark Room. Distorted reality. An anonymous backstage crew member, who worked for the Rolling Stones for many years, recounted that during their 1982 European tour, Mick demanded a darkroom be prepared in every hotel they stayed at, a room furnished only with a black mattress, dim red lights, and the echo of his own voice playing through hidden speakers, creating an isolated and profoundly unsettling space. At 3 a.m., he would enter this room with a young woman, and no one was permitted to approach, no one was allowed to disturb them. On one occasion, security personnel heard a blood-curdling scream emanate from that room, a shriek filled with sheer terror. Yet, when they cautiously opened the door, they found only Mick sitting naked on the mattress, breathing steadily, his face utterly devoid of emotion, while the girl lay motionless, clutching a Polaroid photo of herself. When questioned, she responded in a weak voice, as if she had just endured a painful metamorphosis, "I was just born again." This statement was profoundly enigmatic, hinting at a profound transformation. A rebirth not into light, but into shadow. No one dared to ask further questions. What truly transpired within those dark rooms remained a terrifying secret, forever concealed. The leaked tape and the mysterious deaths. When you are Mick Jagger, you need no verification, no external validation. The world bows because you are Mick fucking Jagger, a living legend. An unshakable icon. And in that bowing, you are granted permission to mold morality like clay, shaping it into any form that serves your eternal, unquenchable thirst, a thirst that can never truly be satisfied. In 1993, a VHS tape mysteriously leaked in Berlin, causing a stir within the underground scene. This tape was purported to document a grotesque, nude ritual involving over a dozen people, with Mick Jagger allegedly wearing a goat mask, a demonic symbol, orchestrating the ceremony with Stone songs played in reverse, creating eerie, haunting sounds. The FBI was reportedly made aware of the tape and launched a clandestine investigation, but the case quickly plunged into a suspicious silence. A year later, the cameraman who had filmed the tape was found dead in his car, his face severely disfigured from an alleged electrical accident, a highly questionable explanation. His girlfriend also vanished without a trace. Since then, no one has dared to mention that tape, as if it carried a deadly curse. Unconventional relationships, absorbing life force. At this point, Mick began associating with a distinct group of women, no longer just supermodels, those concerned solely with physical beauty, but rather individuals with deep knowledge of occult practices, astrology, or those who had survived ritualistic abuse. He seemed to seek out damaged souls, individuals with access to other dimensions, those already acquainted with the darkness. One such woman was Elena, from Serbia, a mysterious figure who had reportedly lived with a cult specializing in veganism and sexual breathing, a bizarre form of spiritual practice. She claimed that Mick was the only person who had ever stolen her soul while she was still conscious, a terrifying description of his ability to manipulate the very essence of a person. Their relationship ended after she discovered her name carved backward into a pendant that Mick secretly kept in his suitcase, a clear sign of dark magic, of spiritual control. The muffled voices. Truth concealed. None of these disturbing occurrences ever made it into mainstream media. The powerful press seemed to be silenced by an unseen force. Rolling Stone magazine, an emblem of rock and roll culture and once a voice of rebellion, had an 8,000-word article poised to expose some of Jagger's horrific white sleep nights. The article was pulled offline just 2 hours after its publication. The courageous reporter who wrote the piece, a man who dared to confront the truth, was fired from the publication, and his career was utterly destroyed. Years later, he revealed in a small, obscure podcast that before the article was pulled, he received a phone call from a man with a clear British accent, his tone cold and utterly menacing. "Are you writing the devil's biography?" Then the phone clicked dead. A chillingly clear warning about Jagger's boundless power and the shadowy figures who stood behind him. And through it all, the most terrifying aspect is that Mick did not fully conceal, did not entirely mask, his true nature. He seemed to want the world to know, to want them to tremble before his power. In a 2018 interview, when asked if he believed in the devil, Mick gave a slight, knowing smile, his eyes unblinking, a gaze that chilled to the bone. "I don't believe in the devil. I know him." The interviewer thought he was joking, a witty remark from a seasoned star. But no one laughed. Because within that simple statement, a horrifying truth lay hidden, a truth no one dared to confront. He didn't believe, he knew. And he knew, because he was a part of it. Or perhaps, even more unsettlingly, he was its very embodiment. The immortal within, deaths around Mick Jagger. At a certain altitude, the air grows so thin that normal breathing becomes impossible, only silent endurance remains. An acceptance of ultimate deprivation. Mick Jagger has dwelled at that altitude for far too long, a place where the line between life and death, between reality and illusion, has blurred to a terrifying degree, almost ceasing to exist. From his opulent penthouse overlooking the world like a trivial jest, to his Chelsea mansion filled with bloodied flowers and the stale lipstick marks of utterly depleted souls, he no longer seems to require oxygen. No longer needs the basic necessities of human existence. He subsists on the frenzied roars of the crowd, on the adoring, upturned gazes of those who still believe in their idols, and on the withered flesh of nameless souls, the invisible victims he has ruthlessly devoured. But as everything gradually unravels, as the night stretches longer than the shrieking guitar riffs, as familiar bodies become lifeless relics, as lies can no longer conceal the brutal truth, he begins to hear something else, the sound of his own fracturing. Or perhaps the sound of the world around him slowly crumbling into dust. A death knell, not for him, but for all who have crossed his path. Brian Jones. The doomsday bell of annihilation. The death of Brian Jones was not merely a first chime, it was a doomsday bell, a chilling premonition of the true, sinister nature of the Rolling Stones universe. In 1969, the founder of the Rolling Stones, a talented but fragile and deeply conflicted musician, was found dead in his swimming pool at Cochford Farm. Just weeks after being unceremoniously ousted from the band by Mick and Keith, as if he were a discarded rag, no longer of use. Brian was a lost soul. Relentlessly battling drug addiction and the crushing pressures of fame, but his death remained perpetually shrouded in an impenetrable mist of mystery. Some claimed it was a tragic accident, the inevitable consequence of a debauched life steeped in countless stimulants and reckless choices. Others whispered of a deliberate murder, a cold-blooded purge, a ruthless conspiracy to protect the Stones' burgeoning empire, then poised for global domination. But one drunken night in Morocco, Anita Pallenberg, Brian's former lover and later Keith's, a woman who had witnessed everything, the very degradation of the souls around her, once whispered to a fellow actor, her voice trembling with an unnerving resonance, as if uttering a cursed secret. Brian knew too much. Mick didn't need a witness. Just background music. That statement wasn't mere suspicion, it was a direct accusation. A chilling revelation of a dark secret that ultimately became buried by immense power and terrifying silence. Anita later died in solitude, amidst a pile of syringes and old cassette tapes, where an unreleased recording played a haunting, repeating lyric like a self-fulfilling curse, "You drowned him, now drown me." It was as if Brian's final, unspoken plea had been channeled through Anita, a smoldering accusation, a whispered indictment from a restless grave. No one ever truly investigated. Who would dare to investigate a man like Mick Jagger, a monumental icon, someone who could turn truth into ash with a mere dismissive sneer? Someone who could make the entire world believe whatever he desired? Gram Parsons, the purified death by shadow. After Brian came Gram Parsons, a talented musician, a kindred spirit who had drifted through the same drug-fueled and LSD-laced flights of fancy in the Joshua Tree Desert with Mick Jagger. They had once lain on the scorching sand, gazing up at the stars, laughing like wild, abandoned children, seeking the new limits of self, of consciousness, of existence itself. Their connection wasn't just friendship. It was the eerie synchronicity of two rebellious souls, seeking destruction within untamed beauty, seeking the abyss and the euphoria of music. But when Gram died of an overdose in 1973, his body was illegally cremated in the desert by a friend to purify his soul, a bizarre act, one that aligned with no known human ritual. Rumors spread like wildfire that it was Mick Jagger himself who had coldly, decisively ordered, "Don't bury him. Let the desert consume him, let him turn to dust." Everyone assumed it was Mick's poetic flair, a grand, tragic tribute to a free spirit, an act of high artistry. But when Gram Parsons' mother heard those words, she screamed in pain and indignation. A heart-wrenching wail from the depths of her being, "Mick doesn't write poetry. He collects other people's souls. He steals souls." This accusation was more haunting than any suspicion, a direct, weighty indictment. Mick never spoke about the incident afterward, never offered a clarification, never showed remorse. There was only a brief, chilling note in his personal songbook, scrawled in a trembling hand, like a cold whisper, a lingering trace of a consumed soul. "Gram, a whisper now. A soul that was once brilliant, full of aspiration, now reduced to a whisper." A faint imprint in his endlessly long life, further proof of his uncanny ability to absorb life force. Bianca Jagger, escaping the lion's den by miracle. Bianca Jagger, Mick's only legal wife, once recounted that living with him was like living inside a lion's chest, beautiful, powerful, and if you make one wrong move, you'll die instantly. It was a profoundly dangerous relationship, where deadly charm concealed a brutal predatory instinct, an insatiable hunger for possession. Throughout their short but tragic marriage, she suffered 3 miscarriages. 2 hospitalizations for severe depression, and a temporary bout of amnesia after witnessing Mick talking to his shadow in the mirror, a ghastly image suggestive of terrifying personality dissociation or the invasion by another entity, something inhuman. She left him after a debauched party in Rio de Janeiro, where she was found sobbing uncontrollably at the foot of the Christ the Redeemer statue, clutching a trembling Bible, and speaking in desperation, "I can't escape without a miracle. I need a miracle to save me." It was the desperate cry of a soul that had touched the abyss of destruction, a final plea before being completely swallowed. The divorce was quiet, without noisy disputes or lawsuits. Mick simply let her go, as if she had never truly been a person, as if she were just an old toy, a used object to be discarded without a second thought. He had no need to hold on to what had already withered. Jerry Hall, an unfinished story in the loss of a soul. One rainy afternoon in Paris, Jerry Hall, the woman who remained with Mick the longest, seemingly his final harbor, the one who might tame the demon, was found unconscious in a bathroom, her pulse faint, her mouth stuffed with crumpled tinfoil. Likely the remnants of a botched suicide attempt, a desperate effort to escape the infernal spiral. Scrawled on the wall in red lipstick, like a final accusation. A silent scream sent out to the world, "You killed me while I was alive." She did not die physically, but after that incident, she refused all interviews concerning Mick. When asked about him at a fashion event, she merely spoke, her gaze distant, her voice imbued with a haunting melancholy and grim understanding, "I am no longer myself. I am a story he began writing, then threw into the fire. I am a discarded manuscript, a soul torn to shreds." People failed to comprehend her cryptic words. But anyone who had ever loved Mick, anyone who had stepped into his world, they understood the profound devastation he wrought. Jerry Hall did not die, but a part of her soul dissolved into the smoke and breath of an unerasable past. The darkness of the 2000s, vanishing souls and eternal mysteries. A strange phenomenon began to occur in the 2000s, a chilling coincidence, almost a new curse. Individuals who had been close to Mick, fleeting lovers, music video models, long-term technicians, trusted backstage assistants, began to disappear or die in bizarre, inexplicable circumstances, without clear answers. A Brazilian girl named Nina, who had appeared in the Streets of Love video with radiant beauty and vibrant energy, vanished after traveling to London on an invitation to have tea with the big man, a nickname for Jagger, a trap laid with sinister precision. 6 months later, her body was found in an abandoned warehouse in Hackney, with a symbol resembling the Goat's Head Soup album cover carved into her chest, an emblem of sacrifice and dark magic, an undeniable mark. Police concluded suicide, a hasty and flawed judgment. But her father, in his agonizing grief, cried out, "She never listened to Stone's music. Why would she die with a stone symbol on her chest?" This was a ritual. No one answered that question, and the case file was quickly closed. A lighting technician named Daryl, who had worked with the Stones since 1988, dubbed the Devil's Lightkeeper for his almost supernatural ability to manipulate stage lighting, creating mesmerizing illusions, was found hanged in the studio with a suicide note containing just 3 words, like a final, chilling curse, "Light is wrong." The manager who found his body said, his voice trembling, "The lights in that room kept changing color, dancing eerily. No one touched the switches, as if an invisible force was controlling them." Some suggested it was merely electrical interference, a simple technical malfunction. But an indie singer who had recorded nearby asserted, with a look of horror, "I heard singing echoing from the walls." It was Jagger's voice, but the song was unreleased, it was haunting, a whispered curse. Mick said nothing. No investigation, no denial, no statement. No explanation whatsoever. He learned what devils often do: silence is the ultimate power, the most impregnable armor. His silence was more terrifying than any words, a chilling, unspoken affirmation. In subsequent concerts, he appeared as if he had no blood on his hands, still writhing, howling, kicking like it was 1972, full of primal energy and wildness. But if you looked closely into his eyes, you'd notice a strange, cold truth: his eyes no longer reflected the stage. They were as empty as a dry well, where all sounds are sucked away before they can echo, where there is no life. Only infinite emptiness, a black hole that devours everything. Ren Scott, the final victim of immortality and the lingering curse. And then came Ren Scott, the last woman on his long list. The one the world believed would be a peaceful haven for both of them. Model, designer, confidant, and, according to a close friend, the last one crazy enough to think she could heal Mick. Could bring him back to the light. She lived reclusively, without fanfare or scandal, attempting to build a normal life beside a demon that perpetually haunted her. But inside, she was as empty as a velvet box stripped of its ring, a soul utterly drained, leached of all vitality. Friends recounted that Ren often awoke in the middle of the night, her neck drenched in sweat, her hands grasping at air like a drowning person, a recurring nightmare that relentlessly pursued her. "I dreamt I was stuffed into a suitcase," she recounted. Her voice thick with dread, and Mick was sitting on it, holding a mic, smiling, but his eyes weren't, his eyes were empty as hell. Then she committed suicide, quietly, without warning. In the apartment she once called their warm den. No suicide note, no explanation. Only a phone left open with an unsent recording, Mick's laughter. Cold. Long. Then it cut off. A laugh of triumph. Of ultimate destruction, a sound echoing from the abyss. After that death, people expected Mick to collapse, expected him to pay the price for what he had done, for all the souls he had devoured. But no. He continued to tour, to dance, to smile, remaining the undying icon of rock and roll, an unshakable deity. Only one night, as the Stones played the mournful ballad Wild Horses at the Tokyo Dome, the camera caught a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. Reporters called it a tear, a rare moment of vulnerability. A flicker of humanity. But the lighting technician, who had witnessed him for so long, who had seen the horrors behind the curtains, said, "I've never seen anyone cry without a grimace." He just let it fall, as if it was excess blood from someone else, a meaningless drop of fluid, a tear stolen from a soul he had plundered. At the high altitude where Jagger resides, there is no oxygen, no humanity, only ghosts hovering around memories, lingering moans in old studios, and unfinished musical notes. Because there is always a new body waiting to collapse under the microphone, waiting to be drained. People say Mick Jagger is immortal. But if that's true, what is the cost of that immortality? Is it the price of countless souls he has corroded, destroyed, reduced to nothingness in exchange for his own eternal existence? No one knows for sure. Only the former victims, the ruined souls, and the carefully hidden songs, the unreleased recordings, the whispered curses from nameless graves, truly know. And if one day you happen to hear a Stones melody echoing in a desolate place, don't sing along. Cover your ears. Because who knows, Mick might be singing to call another soul. To drag another victim into his endless spiral, into the abyss of his cruel immortality. The survivor within his own legend. When a man has experienced everything, mad love, the tragic deaths of those closest to him, dark rituals, the depths of drug addiction, the dizzying heights of fame, and even the abyss of utter solitude, what could possibly still frighten him? Not the law, for he has always stood beyond its reach. Not illness, for his body seems impervious to decay. Not the aging that everyone perceives whenever he takes the stage, his face contorted like a sacred stone gargoyle about to crack. A living statue weathered by millennia. The only thing that truly frightens Mick Jagger making him genuinely tremble, is silence. Not the mystical silence of the deep night, but the quiet after the storm, when every chaotic frenzy has dissipated. A place where no one calls his name with admiration or hatred. Where no one desires to touch him with lust or enmity. Where every fervent applause has finally dried up, leaving only a hopeless, echoing void. And it was in this very silence, this profound stillness, that was once his most terrifying enemy, that Mick Jagger first encountered something even more horrifying than drugs, women, or demons: the naked truth about himself. M in Province, the echo of a soul. In 2014, following the death of Ren Scott, the shockwaves didn't merely reverberate through the fashion and entertainment worlds, it struck a profound blow to Mick Jagger's seemingly invulnerable facade. He vanished for an extended period, not in the usual sense of a celebrity going into hiding, but completely disappearing from the chaotic showbiz world, from close friends, from aggressive paparazzi. Even his most trusted staff couldn't reach him. Rumors circulated that he had gone to India, seeking meditation to cleanse his soul. Other sources whispered he had moved to Iceland, living in a wooden cabin by an icy lake, searching for isolation amidst the wild, untamed wilderness. But the chilling truth was that Mick Jagger went to a place no one expected, a secluded psychiatric institution in Provence, France, a place that had previously admitted celebrities who had lost control of reality, souls swallowed whole by the blinding glare of fame. He didn't use his real name, simply calling himself M. He made no demands, showed no anger or frantic celebrity tantrums. He merely repeated a single sentence, like a haunting whisper: "I can still hear their voices." A nurse who cared for him at the institution, an elderly woman with eyes full of profound understanding, recounted that every morning, Mick would sit motionless by the window, gazing out at the quiet garden, clutching a photograph, a black and white, yellowed image, with a note on the back: Hyde Park 1969. It was the memorial concert for Brian Jones, his friend, his co-founder, whom he had ruthlessly cast aside and who had ultimately met a tragic, inexplicable end. But when asked why he kept staring at that photo, Mick merely whispered, his voice sounding as if from another dimension: "Because I see blood in the bushes." Everyone was looking at the stage, no one looked down. That wasn't just an image, it was a haunting memory. A horrific truth he had buried for far too long, festering beneath the surface of his carefully constructed persona. No doctor at the institution could fully grasp the profound meaning of that statement, dismissing it as merely a sign of psychological disturbance. But an independent psychological analyst once remarked in an unofficial interview, "Some people aren't insane, they simply carry too many dead bodies, to the point where their minds cannot bear the burden." He left the institution after 8 months, offering neither thanks nor farewell. He departed as silently as he had arrived, leaving only an empty space in the quietude of the asylum. A week later, paparazzi captured his image in a small bar in Berlin, wearing a long coat, a pulled-down hat, smoking alone in the shadows. People assumed he was back, the familiar Mick Jagger they knew. But this was no longer the energetic Mick Jagger of Jumpin' Jack Flash, nor the wild and sensual one of Brown Sugar. This was a quieted version, his eyes deeply sunken, carrying an eternal weariness, his lips pressed together as if holding an unspeakably vast secret, a confession that could not be voiced. A silent apology: the truth begins to unravel. Then he reappeared on stage, a new tour, a new album, scattered interviews. Still the Rolling Stones, still the legend. But this time, something was different, a subtle shift that only the most discerning observers noticed. Mick no longer danced with his former frenzied abandon, no longer howled like a demon possessing a body. He slowed down, observing the audience as if searching for a familiar face in a sea of strangers. One night in Buenos Aires, mid-song, he unexpectedly paused, bowed his head, then spoke into the microphone, his voice filled with raw emotion and a profound hint of remorse. "If any of you met me when I was young, I'm sorry." The entire stadium fell silent. Not a single sound. An apology from the man who once famously declared, "I am my own Bible, an untouchable entity." It was a shocking moment, an admission no one had ever anticipated. Some eager reporters quickly dismissed it as a sign of decline due to age, the fatigue of a weary legend. But the truth was precisely the opposite. It was the first time Mick Jagger had been truly honest. Honest with himself, with the ghosts of the past that had relentlessly haunted him. He began writing a diary, not for publication. Not to create another sensational tell-all book, but to record his own confessions, to finally confront what he had done, the lives he had fractured. A hotel maid who accidentally glimpsed a few pages, unable to grasp the profound meaning, nevertheless sensed the torment. He wrote as if he was tearing out his own heart, dipping it in blood, and then continuing to write. In it, Mick detailed the people he had abandoned, the secrets no living soul remained to verify, and his greatest fear, that one day no one would remember the truth. Only the legends woven by others, and he would be forever trapped within that glittering, false facade. Reconciliation with ghosts. The final period. He also began meeting with old acquaintances, not to rekindle relationships, not to seek forgiveness, but to bring definitive closure. To free himself from the invisible bonds of the past. He visited Keith Richards, his lifelong companion, his brother-in-arms, and the one with whom he had committed countless transgressions. The two sat for 3 hours without uttering a single word. They simply played an old tape, drank, and looked at each other as if rereading a tattered, ancient scripture containing all the secrets of their lives. He visited Brian Jones' grave, for the first time in over 4 decades. The cemetery caretaker said Mick brought no flowers, only a worn old comb, which he placed on the tombstone. No one understood that gesture. But perhaps it was the apology only Brian needed, a poignant symbol of a severed connection. At the age of 78, Mick Jagger, though still Mick, had become something untouchable, unknowable. He didn't age like ordinary people, he simply wore down. Like an ancient statue slowly eroded by time and the fierce winds of history. His cheekbones were deeply hollowed, his voice occasionally fractured. But his eyes still held the gaze of someone who had seen hell and returned, bringing with him its detailed blueprints, a gaze that saw through all truths. Someone once asked him, "Do you see yourself as a survivor?" He replied, his voice calm, profoundly contemplative, "No. I am the one left behind. Everyone else has gone. I am still here. Because I am the ending they haven't written yet, a final chapter that cannot yet close." The laugh of the immortal. The story of Mick Jagger, after all, is not merely about a rock icon, a glamorous star. It is about a man who dared to venture to the very edge of every boundary, of fame, of desire, of destruction, then quietly looked around. Finding himself alone in a vast ocean of notoriety, within the emptiness he himself had created. He was once the embodiment of rampant sexuality, of unforgivable sin, of uncontainable wildness. But now, he is merely a witness to a bygone era, to the souls who have departed. And in every great legend, there must always be a survivor to tell the tale. He is that survivor, carrying within him all the scars and ghosts of a tempestuous life. When the Rolling Stones performed at Glastonbury for what was said to be the last time, hundreds of thousands of people stood in the pouring rain, raising their phone lights, singing every word of "Gimme Shelter," a haunting anthem about finding refuge in the storm. Mick stood center stage, not singing, just looking down at the sea of faces, then turned to the giant screen behind him, where images of the departed band members appeared one by one: Brian Jones, Charlie Watts, and Loren Scott. He nodded gently, as if finally, the voices of hundreds of thousands were loud enough for them, the ghosts of the past, to hear. And then he spoke, not a song, but a whisper, a confession that resonated across the giant screen, seeping into every soul present at Glastonbury. I am still here. Not because I want to be, but because I don't know what else to do. And that was the moment Glastonbury fell silent, not from shock, but because for the first time, they saw a god admit to being human. A devil who had confronted his own profound emptiness. This is the story of Mick Jagger, a survivor within his own legend. He is not immortal in the sense of being unable to die, but immortal because he has become an icon, an indelible cut in the fabric of modern cultural history. His existence is more than just music, it is a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest figures are also the most cursed, forever trapped in their own shadow.